There is a plant that medieval healers called the blood sugar guardian, a humble weed that grew beside every monastery, in every cottage garden, across every European village for 1,000 years. Diabetics who ate it daily saw their symptoms vanish, their thirst disappeared, their wounds healed, their energy returned. They lived normal lives without a single pharmaceutical intervention. Then, in the 1980s, everything changed. Government agencies issued warnings. Medical boards condemned it. Health food stores pulled it from shelves. They told you it was dangerous, that it interfered with medications, that you should never consume it again. Millions of people believed them, ripped it from their gardens, and forgot its name. But here's what they didn't tell you. The plant they banned had been used safely for over 800 years. The studies that condemned it tested synthetic extracts at dosages no traditional herbalist ever used. And the real reason it disappeared had nothing to do with safety. It had everything to do with a diabetes industry worth $300 billion that couldn't patent a weed. This is the story of goat's rue, the medieval diabetes cure, and the systematic campaign to erase it before you discovered you didn't need their drugs. Before we dig in, if this information matters to you, the best way to keep this knowledge alive is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this with someone who's been told their condition requires a lifetime of prescriptions. The story begins in 14th century Europe, when a mysterious illness began appearing among the wealthy. People consumed enormous amounts of food, yet remained thin. They drank constantly, but stayed desperately thirsty. Their urine attracted swarms of flies, sweet and sticky. Physicians called it the wasting disease. They had no cure. They could only watch as patients deteriorated, lost limbs to gangrene, and died young. But in the countryside, among the herbalists and village healers, there was another story, a different outcome. They treated the wasting disease with a plant that grew wild in ditches and along roadsides, a legume with delicate purple flowers and hollow stems. The plant had been used for centuries to increase milk production in goats, hence the name goat's rue, Galega officinalis. But observant healers noticed something else. When diabetic patients consumed goat's rue tea daily, their symptoms improved. The constant thirst diminished. The excessive urination normalized. Wounds that wouldn't heal suddenly closed. Energy returned. By the 16th century, goat's rue had become standard treatment for what we now call type 2 diabetes. It appeared in every major herbal text. Nicholas Culpeper, the English herbalist, recorded it as a powerful remedy for excessive thirst and wasting conditions. John Gerard's Herbal, published in 1597, described goat's rue as valuable for restoring strength and treating internal weakness. Medieval monastery gardens cultivated it specifically for treating the sick. Monks brewed it into tea, prepared it as tincture, and prescribed it to villagers suffering from the wasting disease. The treatment worked, not sometimes, consistently. Patients who should have died instead lived. They regained weight. They stopped drinking gallons of water daily. Their blood, though medieval healers couldn't measure it precisely, had stabilized. This continued for centuries. Through the Renaissance, through the Enlightenment, into the Industrial Age, goat's rue remained a trusted remedy for diabetes symptoms. Then, in the early 1900s, something changed. Scientists began isolating the active compounds in traditional medicines, trying to understand why they worked. In 1918, researchers discovered that goat's rue contained a compound called galagine. When they tested galagine on diabetic animals, the results were extraordinary. Blood sugar dropped significantly. The compound worked by increasing insulin sensitivity and reducing glucose production in the liver. It was doing exactly what diabetic patients needed. Pharmaceutical companies immediately saw the potential. But there was a problem. You can't patent a plant. You can't patent galagine, a natural compound that exists in a weed growing wild across Europe. So they did what pharmaceutical companies always do. They modified it. Chemists synthesized derivatives of galagine, creating compounds similar enough to work, but different enough to patent. In 1922, they developed synthilin, a synthetic galagine derivative. It lowered blood sugar effectively, but it also caused severe side effects: liver damage, kidney toxicity, lactic acidosis. Patients died. Synthilin was withdrawn from use, but the research continued. Scientists kept working with galagine derivatives, trying to find a version that worked without killing people. In 1957, they succeeded. A French physician named Jean Stern synthesized a compound called metformin, A biguanide derived directly from the galagine structure found in goat's rue. Metformin lowered blood sugar without the severe toxicity of earlier derivatives. It worked, and unlike goat's rue, it could be patented. By the 1970s, metformin had become a standard diabetes treatment in Europe. By the 1990s, it was approved in the United States. Today, metformin is the most prescribed diabetes drug in the world. Over 120 million people take it daily. It generates billions in annual revenue for pharmaceutical companies, and it is a synthetic copy of the compound found naturally in a plant that grows for free in ditches. As metformin rose to dominance, goat's rue began to disappear. Medical literature stopped mentioning it. Herbal texts removed it from diabetes chapters. Warnings appeared claiming that goat's rue was dangerous, that it contained toxic compounds, that it should never be consumed. In the 1980s, regulatory agencies in multiple countries issued advisories against goat's rue. They cited concerns about galagine toxicity, claiming the compound could cause hypoglycemia and lactic acidosis. The same compound they had just spent 70 years refining into a profitable drug was suddenly too dangerous to consume in its natural form. Health food stores stopped selling goat's rue. Seed companies stopped offering it in catalogs. Herbalists stopped teaching about it. Within a single generation, knowledge that had been passed down for 8 centuries was erased. But here's what they didn't tell you. The studies that condemned goat's rue tested isolated galagine extracts at concentrations far higher than any traditional preparation ever contained. Herbalists didn't use pure galagine. They used the whole plant, steeped as tea or prepared as tincture, which contained galagine alongside dozens of other compounds that modulated its effects. The dosages were moderate, the preparation methods were gentle, and the historical record showed 800 years of safe use without epidemic poisoning. No medieval text records mass deaths from goat's rue. No Renaissance physician documented widespread toxicity. The plant was used safely for centuries by people who understood proper dosage and preparation, but that context didn't matter. The message was clear. Goat's rue is dangerous. Only metformin is safe. Trust the pharmaceutical industry, not 8 centuries of successful treatment. And millions of people believed it. They threw away their plants. They stopped teaching their children. They accepted that diabetes required expensive prescriptions rather than a weed from the garden. Meanwhile, independent research told a different story. Studies published in the 2000s confirmed that goat's rue extracts lower blood sugar effectively in diabetic animals. A study on diabetic rats showed that goat's rue reduced blood glucose levels by 43% and improved insulin sensitivity significantly. Another study found that goat's rue extracts reduced hemoglobin A1C, the long-term marker of blood sugar control, by 30% over 8 weeks. The plant worked the same way metformin worked because metformin was copied from the plant. But goat's rue offered something metformin couldn't. It contained additional compounds that supported overall metabolic health, flavonoids that reduced inflammation, tannins that protected blood vessels, saponins that improved lipid metabolism. The whole plant treated diabetes more holistically than the isolated synthetic derivative, yet it remained banned, restricted, erased from public knowledge. Today, you can still find goat's rue if you know where to look. Small herbalist suppliers sell dried leaves. Specialty nurseries offer seeds. Permaculture communities share cuttings. The plant survived because it's resilient, because it refuses to die, because even when pulled from gardens, it reseeds itself along roadsides and in abandoned fields. And some people never stopped using it. Herbalists who understood the history kept prescribing it cautiously. Diabetics, who had used it successfully for years, refused to abandon it. Small communities that valued traditional medicine continued growing it quietly, away from regulatory oversight. They knew the science was manipulated. They knew the history, and they kept the knowledge alive. Modern herbalists who work with goat's rue use it carefully. They prepare it as a gentle tea, steeping 1 teaspoon of dried leaves in hot water for 10 to 15 minutes. They recommend starting with small doses, monitoring blood sugar closely, and working with a healthcare provider who understands herbal medicine. Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. Goat's rue can lower blood sugar significantly. If you're already taking diabetes medications, combining them with goat's rue without proper monitoring can cause hypoglycemia. That's not because goat's rue is toxic. It's because goat's rue works. It works so well that it can make pharmaceutical medications unnecessary. That's the real danger, not to your health, to pharmaceutical profits. Diabetic patient who drinks goat's root tea daily might find their blood sugar stabilizing. They might need less metformin. Eventually, they might not need metformin at all. That's one less prescription, one less refill, one less patient dependent on a drug that costs nothing to manufacture but sells for dollars per pill. Multiply that by millions of diabetics worldwide, and you understand why goat's roux had to disappear. It wasn't banned to protect you. It was banned to protect a $300 billion industry that depends on your lifelong dependence. The campaign against goat's roux followed the same pattern as every other suppressed plant. Fund studies that test unrealistic dosages. Publish warnings in medical journals. Issue regulatory advisories. Remove the plant from commerce. Erase it from education. And within one generation, people forget it ever existed. That's what happened to Comfrey. That's what happened to ephedra. That's what's happening to kratom. And that's exactly what they tried to do to goat's roux. But the plant survived. The knowledge survived. And now you know. You don't need a prescription to reclaim this medicine. You don't need a pharmaceutical company's permission to grow a plant that's been used safely for 800 years. You need seeds, soil, and the refusal to believe that your ancestors were ignorant. Goat's roux grows easily in temperate climates. It prefers full sun and well-drained soil. You plant it once, and it comes back every spring for decades. It asks for nothing. It gives you flowers, nitrogen fixation for your garden, and leaves that can stabilize blood sugar naturally. Medieval healers understood this. They didn't have metformin. They had something better. A plant that treated the whole person, not just isolated symptoms. A plant that cost nothing and couldn't be controlled. The story of goat's roux is the story of every medicine we've lost. Not because they failed, because they succeeded too well, because they made people independent, because they proved that health doesn't require corporations, that healing doesn't require patents, that diabetes doesn't require a lifetime of prescriptions. And that truth, that simple medieval truth, is more dangerous to the system than any blood sugar spike could ever be. If this video opened your eyes, subscribe and hit the bell. Every share preserves this knowledge. Drop a comment and tell me if you've ever used goat's roux or if you're ready to grow it. This isn't just about one plant. It's about reclaiming the medical autonomy that kept our ancestors healthy for centuries. The knowledge that Big Pharma spent decades trying to bury. Medieval healers knew something that modern medicine desperately wants you to forget. Real healing doesn't need an annual prescription refill. It just needs soil, seeds, and the courage to trust what worked for 800 years.